If you're planning to pursue a master's or an MBA abroad at a top-ranked university, then you're probably confused between taking either the GRE or the GMAT. Some people say that the GRE is easier, other people say that business schools prefer the GMAT over the GRE. Now, I myself have a 760 on the GMAT and my company trains hundreds of students every year for the GRE, many of whom go on to get a 320 plus. So I can give you a completely unbiased and nuanced view of both these exams, which is exactly what I intend to do in today's video. I'm going to explain the structure of both the exams, the pros and cons, and help you decide which of these two tests to take. So do watch the whole video. Hi, my name is Amya and I'm a study abroad counselor that's helped hundreds of students get into the world's top ranked universities. I've also done my MBA from the University of Toronto and I make videos on YouTube to help students make the right study abroad and career choices. So if you haven't already, do subscribe to the channel. It'll be a win-win for the both of us. Okay, so let's start by understanding who these tests were actually originally designed for. Now, the GMAT was originally designed for those people who wanted to go to business school, MBA, MFin, MSBA, MIM, these sorts of programs. And the GRE was originally designed for those people who wanted to go for technical master's programs. So a master's in CS, a master's in AI, master's in electrical engineering, master's in architecture even. Now, over time, what has happened is that both these tests have converged in terms of their format, structure, and syllabus. So they've become more similar with the years passing by. And for this reason, many business schools now accept both the GRE as well as the GMAT. However, technical master's programs still accept only the GRE but not the GMAT. So this means that if you're applying for a technical master's program, then you have no option but to take the GRE. There is no scope for the GMAT. Where things become confusing, and which is why we are making this video, is if you're planning to apply to business school for a business or a business related program. Like I said, business schools have started accepting the GRE over the last few years. In fact, the proportion of people who are submitting the GRE score has been steadily increasing. According to Poets and Quants, 40% of the applications at the top 10 B schools in the United States now have GRE submissions and not GMAT submissions. And at 17 out of 54 business schools in the United States, GRE submissions actually outnumbered the GMAT submissions. Okay, so if you are applying to a business school or a business related program, how do you decide between the GRE or the GMAT? Let's figure this out by first understanding the structure of both these exams, because understanding this is key to understanding the differences and the nuances between the two. Now, both these tests are actually aptitude tests and they are tests of your English and quant reasoning skills. They have three parts to them. You have a quant section, you have a verbal section, and then you have a third section. And it is this third section in which both of them differ. On the GMAT, you have a data insight section where you're giving different sorts of charts, graphs, and tables, and then you ask to solve questions based on the data that's provided to you. Kind of similar like the data interpretation section on the CAT. On the GRE, on the other hand, you do not have a data insight section. Instead, you have an essay writing section called as the analytical writing measure. You're given one topic to write on, you're given 30 minutes, and then you write an essay which is between 400 and 500 words in length. Now, if you're a quant, if you love number crunching, then you'd probably be more suited for the GMAT. However, for many people, the brain just shuts down when they see complicated math or complicated data or complicated charts like the one that you're probably seeing on the screen right now. So if you're afraid of math, if you're afraid of data, you might do better on the GRE, which has an essay instead. Now, the essays on the GRE aren't technical in nature. And in fact, ETS, which is the organization that conducts the GRE, gives you a list of all possible essay topics. So you know what you're going to be asked before you take the exam and you can prepare accordingly. In fact, when you write the essay on the GRE, there is no right answer. You're not graded on your conclusion. You are instead graded on grammar, sentence structure, and the coherence of your logical argument that you present to your essay. So again, if essay writing is your thing, take the GRE. If data and math is your thing, take the GMAT. Plus, the way the third section on both these exams is marked slightly differently. So on the GMAT, again, you have three sections: quant, verbal, and data insights. You get a separate score on each of these three sections, and all those scores contribute to your final score of 805. Now on the GRE, again, you have three sections: quant, verbal, and analytical writing measure. But here, the main score of the GRE, which is out of 340, only consists of your score on quant and verbal, but not consists of your score on AWA. Your AWA score is actually marked separately on a grade of 6, and that score is not considered to be extremely important by universities, which means that to do well on the GMAT, you need to do well in all three sections, but to do well on the GRE, you need to do well in only two sections, quant and verbal, and yes, you need to get just a decent score on the AWA. Let's take a look at the time per question and the level of difficulty of both these exams. Now, the GMAT is 2 hours and 15 minutes in length with an optional 10-minute break. The GRE is slightly shorter, 1 hour 15 minutes in length. So it's 17 minutes shorter than the GMAT, but you don't have an optional break in the GRE. To be fair, the GRE is easier than the GMAT, so you may not even feel the need to take a break on the GRE, because Because the GMAT, the questions are difficult, it's far more exhausting, and so you need to take that 10-minute break in most cases. The other point of comparison is the time that you get per question. Yes, the GMAT is more challenging than the GRE, but you also get more time per question. As a point of comparison, you generally get slightly over 2 minutes per question on the GMAT, whether it be the quant or the verbal section. But on the GRE, for both quant and verbal, you get less than 2 minutes per question. So it comes down to this. If you want a more straightforward set of questions and you don't mind context switching between questions, go for the GRE. But if you need more time per questions and you don't mind tackling slightly more challenging problems, and if you want that optional break, go for the GMAT. Okay, so now let's take a look individually at both the quant and the verbal sections, starting with the quant section. Now, like I said, the GMAT quant is more difficult than the GRE quant. The GMAT quant tests you on 4 different topics: probability, statistics, arithmetic, and algebra. And while the GRE quant is easier than the GMAT quant, you have one additional topic in terms of geometry. Now, I'm not saying that you're not going to get a single question of geometry on the GMAT, but it has a very low weightage and you rarely see questions regarding geometry on the GMAT. The other thing to understand is that while the GRE quant allows you to use a calculator, the GMAT quant doesn't. So if you're planning to take the GMAT, you will have to basically get used to doing a lot of mental math. So again, when it comes to the quant section, it comes down to this. Are you okay with preparing for more topics, and do you need a calculator? In which case you go for the GRE. Or do you want to prepare for fewer topics and you don't mind doing the mental math? In which case you go for the GMAT. So next, let's take a look at the verbal sections. Now, while there are some differences in the quant sections of both these tests, the differences are arguably more when it comes to the verbal section. The GMAT at the end of the day is a test of your language comprehension and reasoning skills. So you only see questions based on reading comprehension as well as critical thinking. The GRE, on the other hand, tests your language comprehension skills, but it also tests your vocabulary. So 50% of the questions are reading comprehension questions, but the remaining 50% questions are text completion or sentence equivalence questions, which basically test your vocabulary. So if you're planning to take the GRE, be prepared to memorize hundreds of words that you typically never use in your day-to-day life. Now let's take a look at the adaptive nature of the exams and how they differ in their approach. For those of you who don't know, an adaptive test is one where the level of difficulty of the exam changes based on how you answer questions. So the more questions you get correct, the more difficult the exam becomes. The more questions you get wrong, the easier the exam becomes. That's the concept of an adaptive exam. Now both the GRE and the GMAT are adaptive exams, but they are adaptive in different ways. The GMAT is question by question adaptive and the GRE is section by section adaptive. So what does that mean? Well, on the GMAT, the level of each question changes based on how you answer the previous questions. So get one question correct, the next question is more difficult. Get the same question wrong, the next question is easier. Now, because the GMAT is adapting on a question by question basis, you cannot go back and change your answers, and neither can you skip any questions. Now, on the GRE, I said that it is section by section adaptive. So what does this mean? Well, remember I told you that you have a quant section and a verbal section. So you actually have 2 subsections for both quant and verbal. And the first subsection of both quant as well as verbal is going to be of medium difficulty level. Now, depending on how you do in that first subsection of quant and verbal, the next subsection for either quant or verbal will either be harder, medium level, or will be easier. So this means that within a section, you can skip questions, you can come back to questions and review them, and you can also change your answers. So the GRE is definitely more flexible when it comes to coming back and changing your answers. And if that's something that you're seeking, you might prefer the GRE over the GMAT. Next, I want to address an important question. Do B schools, which accept both the GRE and the GMAT, actually prefer the GMAT over the GRE? Now, this is simply not true. For one thing, all B schools use something called as a concordance table. So if you submit the GRE score, they can calculate the equivalent GRE score and vice versa. So it actually makes no difference. But even if you want to believe that, you need to understand that B schools care about your relative performance. This is why when you submit either your GRE or your GMAT score, not only do they ask you for your scaled score or your raw scores, they also ask you for your percentile scores. They want to know how well you've done compared to other people who've taken that same test. So all else equal, someone with a 90th percentile on the GRE will be preferred to someone with an 80th percentile on the GMAT and vice versa. So the question that the business schools are asking isn't whether you've taken the GRE or the GMAT. Question is, how well did you do relative to other people who took the same test? Okay, so finally, should you be taking the GRE or should you be taking the GMAT? If you're applying for a technical master's program, or if you aren't sure whether you're applying for a technical master's program or business master's program or an MBA, then you should always go for the GRE. Because while the GRE is accepted for all kinds of programs, the GMAT is accepted only for business or business related programs. Now, if you are considering a business or a business related program only, Well, then in that case, it really does come down to individual choice. If you prefer a test which is easier, and if you don't mind the vocabulary, and if you need access to a calculator on the math section, go for the GRE. If you want more time per question, if you want fewer topics in mathematics, and if you don't mind the mental math that comes along with the GMAT math, then go for the GMAT. And if you're still confused, take a diagnostic test and see what fits your own personality. And if you're still confused after taking a diagnostic test, then schedule a counseling session with me using the link in the description, and I'll help you figure things out. Now, whatever it is, whether you're preparing for the GRE or whether you're preparing for the GMAT, do consider going for a coaching program. Yes, you can study for these exams on your own and you can do well on these exams on your own. But typically in my experience, students who prepare on their own face three challenges. The first problem is that they don't know the exact contours of the syllabus, so they end up wasting time on those topics that are rarely asked in the exam. The second challenge that students typically face is that they don't have access to up-to-date questions which are at the exact level as the GRE or the GMAT. Keep in mind that these tests keep changing ever so slightly every year, and so a mentor or a professor who has access to these latest questions or who has experience teaching for these exams can help you in that regard. And the third problem that students typically face when they prepare on their own is that their score plateaus at a certain point, because again, both these exams are adaptive in nature, and that is exactly where a mentor can actually help you get unstuck and help you improve your score. So if you are considering a coaching program, especially for GRE, then you might as well consider us. Every year we train hundreds of students and several of those go on to achieve 320, 330 plus scores on the GRE. So if you want to know more about the GRE program that we offer and how we can help you achieve a 320 plus on the GRE, click the link in the description below and schedule a consultation. And if you have any queries about the GRE or the GMAT or about the study abroad process in general, do let me know in the comments and I'll get back to you with my thoughts. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.